My name is Benny Johnson. As some of you know, I've been struggling with addiction. However, I decided to change my life and went into recovery. I've started this podcast 90 Days Clean, and I want to take you along in my journey. What does lie ahead of me? Let me be frank. I do not know. Will I ever drink again? I do not know. This is how Stairway to Redemption was born. It is my search for answer in a real-time process of what is going to work for me. It is then my aspiration to help you figure out what's going to work for you. It is our journey together. Good morning and welcome to Stairway to Redemption, episode 20. Glad to be back. My guest this week is Lorelei. Lorelei and I met at the sober event hosted by our friend at Curious Elixir. Shout out to JW. She's the CEO of Listen Bar and organizer of the Good Award AF standing for alcohol free.
Yeah.
Why don't you introduce yourself, Lorelei? How are you doing?
I liked hearing your version. Hi everyone. I'm Lorelei Vendrovsky, and I am indeed the founder and CEO of Listen Bar, which is an alcohol-free bar that I started in New York City. And we have been hosting the Good AF Awards, which yes also stands for alcohol free. So we last hung out when Benji came out to the Good AF Awards 2023, which was in New York. So I'd say let's pause there for the intro, and more will be revealed.
All right. Thank you. Let's do it like usual in this podcast. We start with the state of the mind address. Basically, it's what's going on with you. So you live in Lisbon. You're in Lisbon right now. How's Lisbon? How's the life? After like spending so much. Yeah.
Lisbon is really cool. I'm part of a sort of wave of expats who are living here, which is interesting, challenging. It's something that I try to see from the point of view of everyone involved. So I'm trying to be a positive contributing member to Lisboan society. And I'm coming at the point where I'm spending my time between here and New York and also my original home, which is Romania. So this is a little bit sort of my midway point between the two anchors, I would say, of my life thus far. I feel like I'm just coming to the point where I really have friends here, and I'm starting to build the community that I've been seeking, which is a queer community. It's also definitely, I guess, like where connections are less strongly tied into alcohol. So I have these new friends who are like cool, creative, like skater, queer people. And it's really fun because I was saying, I feel like this moment in time is definitely one of transformation. And some of that has been kind of closing off and being in a cocoon. And now I feel like I'm kind of on the other side of that, like emerging into the world. And I see that reflected in being in a new place and like starting to see the efforts of my community building, like manifesting. It's an interesting experience as like a 36-year-old woman moving to a new country and building a life. So
that's amazing. That's amazing. Because like I can tell that, I saw firsthand that like you're reaping the fruits of like your community building, and just by the amount of people that show up at Good AF. But yeah, how long you been living in Lisbon? Like, how,
Well, I just got back here a few weeks ago, and then I spent a few months here last year when I made the big leap,
jump? Yeah.
into this more um, uprooted way of living, where I'm
Mhm.
splitting time between multiple places, and my main home base is a city that is very new to me. I hadn't been here before I moved here. So goes to show impulsive decision making can
Wait,
happen
you
outside of
you
alcohol. And sometimes it can be like the good kind of impulsive.
interesting. You telling me you didn't even visit the country? I thought like, something
No,
happened, like you
no.
came on vacation, you really like the culture. So
Uh,
you just pick Portugal and you're like, why not? That's awesome.
well, I mean, there were factors involved for sure. I was
Mhm.
influenced by people I trust, and yeah, I kind of just had a good feeling about it. And so I was also feeling, like I was saying, it was also like a challenging time. I think I was feeling quite depressed. And so one of my mottos, beliefs is that like when you're like kind of unsure and you're not feeling great and there's some kind of flicker of something that gets you excited,
Mhm.
like follow those flickers, because sometimes it feels um really hard to set those like high standards of like sureness. There's always going to be a reason to kind of back out, and sometimes the things that we really want aren't things that make all that much sense.
Mhm.
So I feel like for me, when I've given myself permission to kind of yeah, like follow the flickers, it's generally been a good move on my part. So yeah, it helps to trust yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I understand. I totally see that. And not enough people do that because, I believe that they're afraid of the change because do you know that saying like stick to the devil so like even if they're not in a
Mm.
great situation, they know what they are into, and the unknown scare people more than like being in a bad situation, because yeah,
Right. At
really,
least the bad situation you've been getting through already.
yeah,
So you kind of know what you're dealing with. Yeah, I think that's true.
yeah,
And obviously, there's degrees of possibility, right? Not
yeah,
everyone has uh, the same freedom, the same, like saying that, like, oh, well, follow the flicker, pick up and move countries and
yeah, that's
continents.
true, that's
That's
true.
not something that everyone has access to,
So yeah.
but there is, you know, like there's ways that those flickers show up where it can be less of an extreme step.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but but yeah, for me, I think that was the big scary move.
I see.
And then also figuring out like, okay, but I still have, my business in the States, and like everything with Listen Bar is still very much New York centric. And so
So
that's
about Listen Bar, how did it come to be? Which one came first, Good AF or Listen Bar? Tell
Listen
us the
Bar,
story.
listen.
Yeah, tell us the story. How did
Yeah, for
radio
sure, for
become?
sure. And along the way, I'm also, I guess, going to share a little bit more about like my views and like Listen Bar's views and how we kind of fit into the sobriety landscape, because sober
Mhm.
is not a word that I identify with, nor do I identify Listen Bar with the word sober. So I know that
Oh,
we kind
okay.
of fit
Interesting.
in. Yeah,
Mhm.
well, we were kind of talking about that at the Curious event, but it's
Yeah.
it's a good conversation to have here on the podcast too.
So what's your
So
relationship then? Yeah. Sorry to cut you off. So.
yeah, yeah. So here we go. So Listen Bar started on a dare. A friend dared me to take a month off of drinking some years ago. And I kind of went into it very skeptically, not being sure that this was going to bring anything new to my life. And I came out of it like really surprised, very pleasantly surprised. And I was like, oh, like I thought I was going to be missing out on alcohol for a month, but it turns out that I had been missing out on not drinking. And I didn't even realize that that was an option. And so it kind of planted this little seed. And so, as the years went on, I kept kind of returning to this practice. And I noticed that I started drinking less and less throughout, whether it was like going out and like drinking more water in between alcoholic drinks, or just having nights of not drinking completely. And slowly it kind of became my preferred way to go out.
Oh, okay.
And so I kind of like, started off where the balance was, where, like 90% of the time I would drink, and then like a little bit I wouldn't. So slowly it kind of became like, you know what, I really like not drinking, and I keep choosing it because I keep liking it better when I do. And so I kind of wanted there to be spaces where it felt more accessible to not drink, where it felt like the space was designed for it, in the same way that bars are typically designed around alcohol. And all these like social conventions, from like bartenders to like other people in the bar and to the menu and to everything, it all is so kind of like geared towards alcohol. And I wanted a space that did the opposite, that like catered super thoughtfully and kind of like in a fun, exciting way to not drinking, and kind of took like the parts that I found were best about when I would go out, and like the things that I kind of liked about that, I wanted to, bring into a social space that wasn't centered around alcohol. So I kind of liked, how casual a bar is, that you can just kind of pop in. There's an element of serendipity, in terms of like who you might have a conversation with, or like what thing that's happening in that environment is going to spark some interesting moment of your night. Because I kind of liked that feeling of like, you walk into a bar and you don't exactly know where your night's going. I feel like restaurants, they don't exactly have that. Like, you're going to go sit down, have a great meal. I hope you have some kind of extra, experience. But I feel like bars, it's so much more about the socializing. And I really wanted to kind of wrap that in all like the fun, juicy goodness that could be that. And I also kind of felt like when I was, doing things out and about, when I didn't feel like drinking, all of the things kind of felt a little bit like too serious and too kind of righteous, like you can go do yoga, you can go, if you're like an athletic person who's into like rock climbing, like blah, blah, or like this whole scene around like, I don't know, ecstatic dance and things like that. And I was like, I love that those things exist. In a lot of ways, those things inspired me. But at the same time, I was like, like sometimes this thing that I'm doing that is like good for my body, I still want to feel like my regular self. I don't want to be in my like spiritual like vibe. I want to have like a goofy, rowdy time. That was kind of the thing that I really wanted Listen Bar to preserve from like a regular bar, plus like next level in terms of the alcohol-free cocktails. And so that was like the recipe behind the idea, and started doing pop-ups with Listen Bar in 2018. And one thing about Listen Bar is that all of our bartenders are musicians.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, that's why it's called Listen Bar. So,
I got it.
The bartenders like set the music, make the playlist, and a lot of times they showcase some of their own music, and I kind of wanted it to be like this entry point to like music and conversation, so that you have a little icebreaker. If you walk into this party knowing no one, you can like start a conversation with one of the bartenders about like what kind of music they make and stuff like that.
Mm.
And then in terms of the cocktails, we have like really amazing mixologists who come from really famous bars that we work with in terms of actually making the recipes for our cocktails. And so we take great pride in our drinks. And that's also why I kind of like this like practice of collaborating with a lot of different mixologists, because I think for me, Listen Bar, I kind of saw it and still see it as this like Trojan horse into culture. And it feels really amazing because we're having this conversation. We're like just getting to know each other in like 2023. And so much has happened in the world of like alcohol free since Listen Bar started in 2018. You know, like the products on shelves alone, the fact that there are alcohol free like liquor stores and like, you know, this kind of stuff to me is such a victory, because that's kind of what I've always wanted, you know, like for me, it's been about changing culture at like a large scale. And so the fact that like this is happening, you know, like it's not just like our bartenders, but like bartenders all over New York and like all over the States, and gradually all over everywhere, are making really good alcohol-free cocktails. And there's really good products that bars can stock that people can buy at home. So that to me gets me really excited. And that's like what Good AF was also about, you know.
Okay.
It was like, okay, how can we like keep everyone else making their drinks better and better, you know, so that like so that all these bars it's not enough to just have an alcohol-free drink on the menu and like some like fruit juice on there. And like if you or I or anyone who wants to go out and like have some drinks, you know, we're talking about being like drink talkers.
Yeah. Like basically putting the same energy that people put into alcohol drinks in non-alcohol drinks, you know, like how like smoky flavor would, you know, or like liquid nitrogen, you know, cold things. Yeah. So
bring it, you know, like I want all of these bars to deliver an amazing experience. And what's really funny is that like, so when I opened Listen Bar, I would still like drink whenever. And now it's been 5 years. And I would say like over the last like year or so, I've really kind of stopped drinking completely. Like even like,
So why don't you call yourself so sorry to sober? So what sober means to you? Like why you make the distinction that like
okay, great question. I feel like sober is a word that means a lot to the people who identify with it. You know, I feel like it's something that people kind of, you know, strongly identify with, sometimes have had to like really like strive for. It also, you know, extends beyond alcohol towards like really any, you know, addictive substance. And there's a really like strong sense of identity to it, you know? And I think that it's something that I want to respect, but I also know that like for me, it's also been like a word that's very intimidating. You know, I love when people give themselves like permission and like give themselves, you know, the opportunity to self-identify and like make it mean what they want it to mean to them. But I also think that there are certain things that like we wouldn't do, if we were like trying to be a sober space. I think that there would be an expectation that everyone is sober and that
Mm-hmm.
everyone like aspires towards sobriety as a lifestyle. And for me, that was one of the big distinctions about Listen Bar is that I've always said like sober, hungover, like
Yeah.
come through, and recognizing that like the sober community is a really important part of our community,
Mm-hmm.
but it is also not the totality of our community, and that we want to be just as welcoming to someone who wants to go out later and drink like 17 tequila shots, and like
Yeah.
that's cool. Like if that's what works for you,
Mm-hmm.
that's great. I mean, we want people to experience that that is not the only way to go out, and to then be able to make choices from a place where like either option is available.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we don't necessarily like frown upon drinking. And that was something that was really important to me because I think it's really intimidating. I think
Yeah.
that, sobriety for a lot of people, it's almost like when you find out that someone is vegan and you start like asking those like gotcha, but what about this? But what
Yeah.
about that? It's
Yeah,
almost like you're
exactly.
looking for this trap to like steal that like label away or to
Mm-hmm.
prove that it's somehow unattainable, which is obviously like a terrible way to react to someone's identity.
I know, right?
Self-labeling, like that's very invalidating. Why would you do that? But like, you know, yeah, it just seems like there's a lot of pressure and a lot
Mm-hmm.
of kind of like specificity around what that can mean for people. And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
I understand what you're saying. So like, because first, like you said, like sober might mean something different for people who went through the trenches of life due to their addiction, whether it's alcohol or like drugs. So they earn that word being called sober. And also you don't want to dwell into like the self-identifying for, I'm going to give you a concrete example here for people, for example, who call themselves Cali sober, who still smoke weed, but don't do alcohol or like hard drugs. Some the hardcore one will not consider them sober because they still use marijuana, which is like different. And
right.
I understand that basically sobriety is what you define it as it is, and nobody should come and tell you that you're not the real deal because your definition of sober is different from somebody else's definition of sober.
Right.
I totally get you there.
And also, not everyone wants that label, you
Yeah,
know?
not
And
everyone
I
wants
think that
that label.
I think that there's a lot of freedom in that. But also, if that is a label that like, someone wants for themselves and like claims, like that, I respect that.
Mhm. But
So,
definitely.
but right,
Yeah,
I
go
I
ahead.
just remember, you know, I feel like I do take issue if people put the word sober on
Hmm.
me or someone else, or like on Listen Bar,
Yeah.
because I feel like that's something that like only you can choose for yourself.
Hmm.
Like I take issue with like other people kind of projecting it.
Projecting that, I think that's fair. That's definitely a fair statement, a fair like feeling and approach. I totally get you that. Next question: what were the challenges when you started Listen Bar? Because like the way you saying, I wonder how did you motivate people to um those bartenders and those places where you did the pop-up Listen Bar, because Listen Bar doesn't have its own physical location, right? It's still just
No, we
okay.
never
So,
did. At one point, that was the goal, but
yeah, but how
yeah,
just
no, it really isn't. But it's true. So, what were the challenges starting out, and
yeah,
like how did I motivate people to get involved?
yeah,
Um, I mean, there were a million challenges starting out, I would
like just
say.
financial
Um,
too is like how you make that
yeah, for
valuable,
sure.
yeah.
For sure. I self-funded the first proof of concept, which with the help of a friend who got really excited about it. So the two of us pretty much self-funded the whole thing, which was we rented out a bar for 10 days. No, not 10 days, for almost a week. And just hosted it as Listen Bar, and it was in October, so we had a Halloween party at the end to like close it off. And yeah, it was a bit of a mad experiment because it was New York in 2018, and people were telling me like that I was crazy because I wanted to do a bar without alcohol. So people would say like, "Oh, like what's next? A restaurant without food?"
Yeah, motherfucker. Sorry.
There were so many people who thought that it was just a completely bonkers idea. But like I would say that it kind of started piecemeal. I kind of started talking about it at this women's leadership little gathering where there were like, I don't know, 8 of us getting like advice. And I said that I had this idea for a bar without alcohol. And those women in that room got really excited about it. I think I had happened to have the exact perfect, audience focus group in that moment, because it could have been a different group of people and given a completely different reaction. But they all got really excited. And then I started an Instagram, and then I published an article on Medium about why I wanted to start Listen Bar, why I wanted to open a bar without alcohol. And then that and the Instagram started like getting notoriety.
Yeah.
And so we got an article published in Culture Trip. And then people started getting excited and signing up for our email list. So it's just like little by little, I would say that there was a lot of kind of ramp up before the first pop up in terms of just people getting excited about it and hearing about the concept and saying, "Oh my God, like I would love a place like that." And so it made me feel like even though there were all these people saying this is the weirdest idea I've ever heard, there were enough of the people saying, "I want this, yes, sign me up," that I was like, all right, I'm not completely, alone over here.
Yeah. No, I understand perfectly because you definitely had an audience, but I think that the naysayers were just louder, not necessarily more, but they were just making they were just making the more noise that it didn't make sense. But I'm glad you found the right people. And then also, when you feature on Good Morning America or something like that. Like,
yes.
How'd that happen?
That's the big thing. That's the big thing that kind of happened. So I kind of wanted people to think that Listen Bar was there to stay. Like I said, like the Trojan horse idea was like really our angle. So invested in this like really expensive like awning for like the location that we were renting for the week, and started like putting out like press releases about this thing happening and like posters and stuff like that in the neighborhood. And then we got a request from the Wall Street Journal being like, "Hey, like you guys are opening this weekend?" I'm like, "Oh my God, yes." And so we had like 20 minutes to get a picture with like the big sign, and then we had to submit it to the Wall Street Journal to get published the next day. And it was this like mad dash. But we made it happen, and then we were in the Wall Street Journal, and then things really kind of picked up from there. We got a lot of press, a lot of like attention, and then we ended up doing a follow-up to the pop-up in January at this other venue, Von Bar off of Bowery, really great place. So we started doing a residency there. The word got out, and we were on Good Morning America. We were on the Today Show. Yeah, we were in like all of this big press, and it was really fun because a lot of times the people interviewing us, they couldn't really believe it. They're like,
Yeah.
"You're doing what exactly?" But they were game, they were open, and so a lot of times if they came through and like tasted the
hmm
drinks, then you had these great reactions.
Yeah,
Craig
it
Melvin.
was just not fancy juice, like it was not just like
Right,
juice, it was other more, yeah,
right.
like people started
You
doing,
know,
yeah, seeing the effort that like was put in making those drinks, and I bet they started respecting the art of it.
kind of, yeah. I
Yeah.
think we have some great like drink reaction shots because people are always like, "Ooh, like wow, great."
hmm
And it's fun when everyone kind of like finds their drink because there's a lot of different options, a lot of different palates considered, and I think that that's just not something that happens often in terms of alcohol-free options, having that possibility of like a really fun menu to choose around from
Yeah.
and to like be like, oh, I really like this one. Oh my God, I love that one. Like you're lucky if there's one and like one of them's good.
Yeah, like I usually go ginger ale or Red Bull, but I don't want to be tweaked out by drinking too many Red Bull. So ginger ale also sometimes might be too fuzzy. Like, yeah, most places don't have. But what's funny? The sober movement is definitely is in its trendy phase. I like it a lot. And
Yeah.
I noticed that now big alcohol is paying attention to it and be like, oh, we can make money in it. What's your position on big alcohol jumping in the sober curious movement? Do you think they will corrupt it? Like, you know, because let me, ex-
There's
let,
there's
let me
well, I have,
elaborate
I
on
have
it.
to like think of diplomatically of like what I can say here.
Yeah. Let me
Um,
let me elaborate on it. For example, like I make the distinction between non-alcoholic drink that are analogs of alcoholic drinks and that taste the same, like zero proof tequila, or like zero proof wine that tastes like the real thing, versus other stuff like let's say like ginger ale or ginger hibiscus, or like something that tastes completely different. Because
mhm.
like let's say like something like a Heineken Zero that tastes like a real thing. Will you let a kid drink Heineken Zero? Why not? There's no alcohol in it, but but it tastes like the same. Well, like why? I make that
Yeah.
distinction between what's
Well,
the
if we're
intention.
talking
Yeah.
about like, yeah,
What?
I don't know. I don't know if I'm like the right person to advise on what kids should drink. Growing up in Romania, I would say that there was a very permissive attitude around alcohol, and I
Yeah.
and I don't completely regret that. Like I feel like there's something to not making it so irresistible by keeping it like completely like gatekeeper, like secret.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I kind of feel like making not so big of a deal of it, but at the same time, I mean, there's a lot of ethical implications, obviously, to big alcohol profiting off of alcohol-free products.
Mm-hmm.
But personally, I would say that there's a couple of different ways that big alcohol is going to respond to success in the alcohol-free market. One
Yeah.
is um, to take over and try to squash it, like take
Yeah.
companies and like not really support them and just hope that like, oh, if we squash this, it's going to go away, which is so far like past the point of that. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are companies like just barreling to the top of like success in the drinks world and the beverage world. And it makes me really happy when I see that some of them are alcohol-free companies, especially ones that, we've like been fans of with Listen Bar since like day one. Athletic Brewing is like at the top of that list. in terms of like the impact that they're making on the category overall. So, it makes me really happy to see companies like that grow. And I think it scares the shit out of big alcohol. So then like another tactic that they can take is that they can try and like invest without necessarily knowing like what's good. But sometimes they invest in like really great companies. And I'd say that's like version 3 when they recognize that this is something to support and that ultimately having great alcohol-free options is great hospitality and is great business. And since they're going to have the infrastructure for a lot of this, it makes sense, like to me, that be one of the channels that like the alcohol-free product movement like gets traction and support and is as widespread as possible. But yes, I'm not going to lie, it also makes me really happy to see success from companies that remain independent, and I think that there's a lot to be said about that. So
a fight for the little guy.
I kind of see it as like a almost like inevitable. And I would hope to see it happen with as much kind of ethical consideration, respect, and like support of good people and great practices.
That's great. Quick question. So what is the alcohol-free scene in Portugal right now compared to is like
oh my God, it's so far behind. It's so far behind.
Behind, you said?
Behind. Oh my God. If I can find kombucha somewhere, I am lucky. And like specialty products, forget about it. So there's a long way to go. I know that there was one alcohol-free like account and like distributor. And I think that they're ramping things back up. I'm very excited to be a frequent customer. And there's some brands that I know are starting to ship out here. So eventually I'll probably be throwing a Listen Bar party in Lisbon, but currently we're keeping Listen Bar definitely more US focused.
That's great, because I was gonna ask, where do you see the movement growing now? Like what's all the new goals? Like what do you have in mind? Like what's the next step for Listen Bar and Good
Well, I would say that this is definitely, I mean, there is something to be said about the global movement of like alcohol free and kind of, starting from these sort of, I don't know, it's kind of messed up because it's like, oh God, like the expat movement has like upsides and downsides. So I want to be really careful with like how I engage with that. But there's a huge opportunity in it, and so I'm obviously gonna leverage my position and perspective and all that in terms of what happens next. But I think that's going to be a really big one, because when you're someone who's kind of seen this movement grow and you've spent a lot of time in places like New York or London, LA increasingly. I think that you start to get used to a certain level of convenience and like a certain like level of options. And so, it makes sense. These are the people who are going to be your, your frequent customers. Because I'm already like, right now we're having this conversation. I'm all out of my fun bevies. Just having water, and I'm like, I have to like find the spots or like put in an order. So I feel like there are a lot of people who can relate to that, especially as we rejigger our geographical plans. And I think that in many ways, like in the way that New York has been like a catalyst. And
Yes.
then, you know, there's people ordering from all over the country and like tuning in and, you know, opening spots of their own and like just advancing the movement. I feel like it's going to keep happening at a bigger scale.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, very good. How you say it? Very noble of you of like, you know, thinking of expanding that movement and seeing where it's going to go next. And yeah, I'm surprised that Portugal is behind. But yeah, next question though. So, you know, in the AA world, which I'm part of, a lot of people like the hard, how you call it, the old heads and the hardliners have that saying that non-alcoholic drinks are for non-alcoholics. That like some of us addicts and people in recovery have no business drinking it because it's a slippery slope. Do you care of if you were given that argument, you know, like how you defend it? Do you care to defend, or like what would you say to those people?
I think that whatever is valid for them is valid, you
Okay.
know? Like if someone hears that statement and says like I feel that, you know, like that's me. Like I think that that's a valid choice, and I think that it's important to have options that go beyond that. You know, but I also think that there are people who might say, you know, like, oh, this is something that's really great for me and has actually helped me like not even crave the alcoholic thing because I'm getting the same kind of, you know, ritual and
Yeah.
like chemical, like brain firing of like a treat.
Yeah.
So if it works for them, that's amazing. I do think that, you know, like there's like the concept of like people being alcoholics and the way that the big alcohol has kind of used that concept to shift responsibility away from like you know, marketing addiction to like, oh, it's your fault, like you have something that is wrong with you. It's not like the system that like has been designed to create that exact form of addiction. So I kind of feel like that's my one, I guess, qualm with that statement. But like, if it feels true for someone, I'm not going to invalidate it.
Yeah.
But I just, that there's something to be said about addiction as like a systemic thing. So, you know, I wouldn't want people to feel like, oh, there's something wrong with you specifically. I feel like if at this moment having anything that reminds you of an alcoholic drink is going to make things hard for you and like be the slippery slope, like then don't go down the slippery slope, you know, that I respect that. And like so the guy who dared me to take that month off of drinking the first time, he's one of people who has never liked alcohol. And so he was someone, and I've read articles from people who have that same opinion, and they feel completely underrepresented in the alcohol-free movement because everything is trying to use like liquor as like the starting point of what something is supposed to taste like. And they're saying like, hey, like, what about people who aren't who want really great alcohol-free drinks, but that aren't necessarily like trying to have them taste like alcohol? And I thought that that was super interesting. That was something that Danny, my friend, he kind of pushed me on. And I realized that, you know, it was definitely something that wasn't as visible in our menu and like wasn't always as much of like a priority in terms of palettes to cover. And I think that was something that we overlooked.
Interesting. I really like your answer. Like, yeah, I don't want to say like it's very like politically correct, but it's very tolerant and compassionate, because you know, you could have told me that like those people are just extremists or something, but like I understand, like it's true, like whatever, it has to do with intentions. I believe also that like if people use those non-alcoholic drinks as like to emulate what alcohol tastes like, it might be a slippery slope. I see where they're coming from, but I'm not gonna lie, sometimes I get annoyed when those old heads hardliner tell me that like, are being judgy. But in the world of AA and those recovery programs, like the addiction is so dangerous and also so deadly that I get why sometimes they don't want to compromise on things and they just use absolutes, and they don't like to be nuanced because it's like nuances can get somebody killed. So I understand both sides. All right. Last question. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yes. No,
No.
I mean, I was just gonna say, I think the only tricky part is that in that community, there's so much around, and I speak as an outsider here, so I don't speak as someone who is part of that community. But I sense that there's so much, desire to support one another, with like sponsorship and like being really available for one another. But sometimes that can go into judgment, and into projecting the things that work for you onto someone else, because you're trying to save them a mistake. But ultimately, like, I think the reason why I don't necessarily resonate with like the AA community is because I don't know. I feel like the fact that I never really felt like, oh, drinking would be a mistake. It was always kind of like, oh, I did it and then I didn't like it. And I was able to kind of separate that, like being permissive with myself was what ultimately led me to making better decisions rather than being restrictive, saying like, I mean, it took that initial restriction. It took that like initial month off with like very clear rules.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like if I was just constantly feeling like I had to live within constraints, like I would never make the choice of not drinking from a place of like preference. I would never make that choice from a place of like, oh, well, I can do either and I really want this. And I think that kind of saved me a little bit.
Yeah.
But again, I don't want to project my experience and say that has to be the blueprint for everybody. So if this doesn't work for you, like you're wrong. So that's just what I found, was that as soon as I kind of took the words always and never off the table, which were very intimidating words.
Oh yeah.
Like, I'm always going to do this, or I'm never going to have another drink. That's like such a scary statement. And as soon as I kind of took those like big statements off the table, I kind of just started choosing more for me. And that has felt empowering. So.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah. Taking those words always and never can be very intimidating. And also looking in the future too much might not be beneficial to myself, All right. Last question before I give you the floor. Top 5 favorite non-alcohol drinks. What are your go-to?
Okay. Well, the first things that come to my mind are drinks from our menu. And probably my 2 favorites. There's this drink called Spicy Titties. which, yeah, there's a whole story behind that. Free the
Okay.
nipple is
Okay.
the
Okay.
yeah. Um, but yeah, so that one is like with cilantro and um with jalapeno. It's got like a little bit of a spicy kick. And we also make it with grapefruit burritos. And one of the things that I really like about that drink is that I can make it pretty much anywhere. Like even when I'm traveling, if I'm in Romania, if I'm in Lisbon, I can make that drink with like ingredients at like a grocery store. Another drink I really like from our menu. This one is like it's like a secret. We don't have that at every party. The spicy titties we have almost all the time, but sometimes we call it spicy AF if there's a brand partner and like we don't want to be too risque. But we'll
Yeah.
still throw a little something in, you know. We always keep it a little inappropriate, a little towing the edge.
Yeah.
But yeah, what was the other one? Pepper spray. This one has like these, like, they are almost like boba balls, but they're bloomed basil seeds. And it's a drink with like mate, like yerba mate or whatever. My favorite are this German brand, Club Mate. If you know, you know.
Club Mate is different from Yoba Mate. Is the another
I
brand?
mean, it's a brand.
Okay.
And I like that whole brand and like the Berlin club scene and like the hacker culture attached to it. And I like it a little bit better than some of the other mate drinks.
Yeah.
It's my personal favorite. Then in terms of like products, I have a lot of love for Ritual alcohol-free tequila.
Yeah, I like those guys too.
Yeah. I would say that's one of my go-tos. I also, oh man, I love like vermouth like drinks. So I really love For Bitter for Worse. Their Ava Spritz is one of my go-tos. I love I also in the vermouth range, I love the Liars vermouths. And their can of the like the Aperol Spritz inspired one. I'm a big fan. Let's see. And then yeah, I'm a kombucha lover. So here in Lisbon, that's my go-to.
Okay.
And then Gia. I also really like Gia.
That's great. Oh, I'm gonna definitely come back to it and listen to those parts, and I'll probably add the description to those drinks later in the episode description. All right, so we reached the end of the episode, and I would like to thank you for being my guest. And the floor is yours. Do you would like to say something before we close?
Oh, thank you. So what would I like to say? Well, I guess the question every time we do a Listen Bar event is always like, what's happening next? So I can say that for this year, we're gonna come back doing some summer parties. So that's gonna be the next time people have a chance to come to one of our alcohol-free parties, and we're kind of leading into that whole like summer party vibe. There's some things I'm really excited to do, and a bunch of other things. But yeah, I'm super stoked on that. And then what else? And we're obviously going to come back in the fall for Sober October / our Halloween party / our 5-year anniversary.
Oh wow, lucky 5. Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So I'm very excited to see you at both of those.
I will be there, definitely.
Yeah, you'll be there.
All right. Thank you very much, Lorelei, for being my guest.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm
excited to see how it turns out. Okay, sounds good.
All right. Well. This concludes episode 20. It feels really good to be back with a fresh episode, guys. Thanks a lot to Lorelei for being my guest this episode. You can follow her on Instagram at listenbar. It's LISTENBAR. I also added the link to the description to both the menu and the Instagram page for those who are interested. As always, thank you for listening. Follow us on social media at Stairway to Redemption, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.